Good evening, and welcome to a very special transmission from Frequency 51. Tonight is Halloween, the night when the veil between worlds grows thin, when shadows lengthen and the old stories awaken from their slumber, while children chase candy through suburban streets and adults toast to costumes and revelry. We turn our attention to something darker, something closer to home than you might imagine. Long Island, the strip of land jutting into the Atlantic where millions live their ordinary lives, harbors extraordinary secrets. Beneath the strip malls and highways, beyond the reach of streetlights and cell towers, old horrors linger. Stories forgotten by time but never quite laid to rest. Tonight I invite you to gather close. Outside, the October wind howls through bare branches. And here, in this intimate circle, I will share with you 4 tales from Long Island's darker past. Tales of creatures that stalked Revolutionary War marshes, of spirits cursed to wander in feathered form, of drowned sailors who refused to stay buried, and of an innocent girl whose unjust death echoes through centuries. These are not the famous ghost stories and urban legends you've heard 1,000 times, stories that echo throughout the mainstream media. These are the forgotten shadows, the whispers locals prefer not to speak aloud. So lock your doors, check your windows, and settle in, dear viewers, for the night is dark and full of terrors. The stories I'm about to tell you took place here, on this very island, perhaps closer to your home than you'd care to know. Let us begin. Our first tale takes us back to the Revolutionary War, to the marshlands near Glen Cove, where British redcoats occupied colonial homes and Patriot sympathizers hid in the shadows, plotting rebellion. In those dark days, travelers began disappearing near a stretch of wetlands known as Boggy Swamp. The marsh sprawled between what is now Laddingtown Road and Old Tappan Road, a desolate place where mist clung to stagnant water and twisted trees seemed to reach with gnarled fingers. At first, people blamed bandits, desperate men, they reasoned, driven to violence by war's chaos. But then the bodies started appearing, or rather, what was left of them. Torn, shredded, partially devoured. The wounds were not made by musket or bayonet. These were claw marks, bite marks, the work of something with terrible strength and insatiable hunger. Locals whispered of a hideous phantom stalking the swamp after dark. A werewolf, massive and ravenous, that would hunt any soul foolish enough to enter its domain. Witnesses who survived glimpses in the moonlight spoke of a creature standing upright like a man, but covered in matted fur, with eyes that glowed yellow in the darkness and jaws that dripped with blood. The beast's hunting ground was precise, always between these 2 roads, always dragging its prey back into the murky depths of the bog where screams would be swallowed by the marsh before anyone could respond. Terror gripped Glen Cove. Townsfolk would travel miles out of their way rather than pass near the Boggy Swamp at night. Even the British soldiers, hardened men who'd faced continental armies, refused to pursue rebel fugitives into those shadow thickets. They called it the Werewolf, and they feared it more than any enemy muskets. But here's where our story takes a curious turn. Years later, after the war ended and the British had sailed home, a patriot's granddaughter revealed a stunning secret. The werewolf, she claimed, had been a hoax, a carefully orchestrated deception created by Glen Cove's rebel sympathizers to protect a hidden refuge in the swamp. Her ancestor, a Patriot spy, had used Boggy Swamp as a secret message drop, relying on the British fear of the werewolf to keep enemy patrols away. Perhaps it was brilliant wartime propaganda. Perhaps rebels dressed in animal skins and howling in the darkness, dragging deer carcasses to leave grisly false evidence. Perhaps the whole thing was theater designed to exploit superstition. But then, how do we explain the very real bodies? The very real terror in the eyes of witnesses who swore they saw something that could not possibly be human? Glen Cove's historian once mused, there is usually a grain of truth to many of these legends. If a person believes he is a werewolf and acts as if he is a werewolf, what have you got? No documented sightings exist in modern times. The swamp has been largely drained and developed. Laddingtown Road is now lined with expensive homes where families sleep peacefully, unaware of what once prowled beneath their manicured lawns. But on certain October nights, when the fog rolls in thick and the moon hangs full and heavy, locals passing through the neighborhoods report an unsettling sensation, a primal fear that prickles the back of their neck, the feeling of being watched by something hungry, something patient. Perhaps the Boggy Swamp beast was merely a clever ruse, or perhaps something genuinely monstrous found refuge in that marsh during the chaos of war, something that learned to hide when the fighting ended, waiting in the deep places beneath Long Island for the world to forget. The swamp may be gone, but marshes have deep memories, and some hungers never truly die. Our second tale takes us from blood-soaked marshes of the North Shore to the pine forests of Brentwood, where in 1877 a man named Charles Codman discovered that death is not always the end, and that some spirits wear feathers. Charles Codman was a respected member of the utopian community then known as Modern Times, a place where free thinkers and idealists built their own society in the Long Island wilderness. On a bitter winter evening, Codman walked through deep snow beneath towering pines when he noticed something peculiar. A large bird, crimson, red in color, huddled in the snow, slowly freezing to death. Red owls do not exist in nature. The color should have warned him. He gathered the magnificent bird into his coat and carried it home to his cottage, placing it near the fire to warm it. As the ice melted from its feathers and life returned to the owl's body, something impossible happened. The bird spoke. Not in screeches or hoots, but in a clear human language, a voice ancient and weary. "Thank you," the owl said, its eyes far too intelligent, far too human, fixing on Codman's face. "I have wandered this earth for generations, trapped in this cursed form, waiting for someone kind enough to save me." The owl revealed its true identity. Chief Werewolf, sachem of the Montaukett people, murdered by Mohawk warriors generations past. His body had been left unburied in the forest, denying his spirit the passage to the afterlife. The Great Spirit, in cosmic irony and justice, had transformed his soul into an owl, condemned to wander the woods as a crimson specter until someone could give his bones the burial rites he'd been denied. "My remains lie somewhere in these woods," the owl said, its voice growing fainter. "Find them, bury them with honor. Only then will I be free." Before Codman could respond, the red owl spread its wings and flew into the darkness. For days Codman searched. He combed the forest, examining every ravine, every hollow. Other villagers thought him mad, obsessed with the ravings of what must have been a fevered dream. But then, in a deep ravine behind his own house, Codman found them. Old bones, weathered by decades of rain and snow. Human bones. He knew instantly these were the remains of Chief Werewolf. With reverence, Codman gathered the bones and buried them properly on the very spot. 3 nights later, Codman woke to a crimson glow filling his bedroom. The red owl had returned, but now it seemed to shine with an inner light, as if the curse had been transformed into something blessed. "You have freed me," the owl said, its voice no longer sorrowful, but filled with gratitude that seemed to resonate in Codman's very bones. "I can finally rest, but before I go, I offer you a gift. I shall become your guardian. This house shall be protected, No harm shall come to you within these walls. From this night forward, your home shall be known as the Hermitage of the Red Owl, forever, for all time. The Hermitage stood until the early 1960s, when it was torn down to make room for Progress, a shopping center. A fast food restaurant occupies the site now. The bones beneath the pine tree, if they were real, were likely bulldozed and scattered, their resting place lost beneath concrete and asphalt. But here's the thing about spirits. Disturb their rest, and they return. In recent years, people walking through the woods near the shopping center report seeing large owls watching them from the trees. Not normal owls. These birds are larger, their eyes more knowing, and sometimes, just sometimes, they appear to glow faintly red in the twilight. Perhaps they're just ordinary owls, drawn by the remaining wilderness. Or perhaps Chief Werewolf has returned, his bones disturbed by development, his curse renewed. Perhaps he watches from the branches, waiting for another kind soul to help him find peace. If you ever find yourself in Brentwood after dark, near the old modern time settlement, and you see a large owl watching you with eyes that seem far too human, remember Charles Codman's story, and whatever you do, treat that owl with respect. Because some debts transcend death, and some spirits remember. Our third tale brings us to Patchogue, to a place locals once called Blood Hill, where Lakeview Cemetery overlooks the bay and holds the restless dead. February 1895 was a month of savage winter storms. On one particularly brutal night, the schooner Louis V. Place was caught in a ferocious gale off Patchogue's coast. The ship fought the waves, but ice formed on the rigging, weighing down the vessel. The wind howled like demons. The temperature plummeted. By morning, the Louis V. Place was a frozen ghost ship drifting towards shore. Of the 8 crew members, 5 had frozen to death, their bodies still clinging to the ice-encrusted rigging, their faces twisted in final agony. Only 2 men survived to tell the tale of horror, hours of watching their shipmates succumb one by one to the merciless cold, unable to help, unable to save them. The dead were recovered and brought to shore. A charitable local woman arranged for proper burials at Lakeview Cemetery, in freshly dug graves on the hill overlooking the water that had claimed them. The sailors received Christian rites and were laid to rest. The rest is not always what the dead receive. Within 2 weeks of the burial, strange reports began filtering through Patchogue. 2 sisters, mill workers, returning home late one night, took their usual route along Main Street, skirting the cemetery hill. As they passed the iron fence, they heard it. A moan. Long, low, filled with such anguish that it froze them in their tracks. Through the fence bars, they saw something that would haunt them the rest of their lives. A figure hovering above the fresh graves of Louis V. Place crew. A man's form, dressed in tattered sailor's clothes, arms outstretched, but where the head should be, there was nothing, just a faint blue glow where the neck ended, pulsing like a beacon in the darkness. The sisters screamed and ran, not stopping until they burst through their own front door. When they returned with help minutes later, the cemetery was silent and empty. But Patchogue now had a ghost. Word spread like wildfire. People began keeping vigil at the cemetery, hoping to glimpse the supernatural visitor. About a week later, a young man named Gerard and his friends got their chance. Around 10 p.m. one night, they spotted the headless figure, this time emerging from the river itself, as if rising from the icy waters that had claimed the sailors' lives. The young men, emboldened by numbers and curiosity, gave chase. As they neared the fence at Waverly Avenue, the phantom suddenly dropped something and vanished into the woods beyond the cemetery. Breathless, the men recovered what the ghost had dropped. An old muslin sailcloth, the kind used on ships, still damp, still cold. Today, Lakeview Cemetery has been restored and is a serene historic site by day. But at night, the atmosphere changes. Locals driving past sometimes find themselves glancing toward the tombstones of those unfortunate sailors, half expecting to glimpse a dim figure with no head, keeping eternal vigil. The sailors of the Louis V. place received proper Christian burial. They were laid to rest with prayers and ceremony. But sometimes burial is not enough. Sometimes the manner of death, the horror of slowly freezing to death, watching your crewmates die around you, knowing you cannot save them, leaves such trauma that the spirit cannot let go. And sometimes, when February storms rage off Patchogue and ice forms on the rigging of ships still plying through waters, people claim they can hear moaning from the cemetery on Blood Hill. The sound of men who died too cold, too afraid, too far from home. Still searching, still wandering, still without rest. Our final tale takes us to Stony Brook, to an elegant colonial building that now serves as the Country House Restaurant, a place where fine dining comes with a side of sorrow and supernatural activity. The house dates to 1710, and in that long history it has witnessed revolution, occupation, and tragedy. But one story, above all others, has earned it the reputation as Long Island's most actively haunted location. Her name was Annette Williamson. She was 17 years old during the Revolutionary War when her family left her in charge of their estate, the Obadiah Davis House. It was a time of chaos, suspicion, and violence. Neighbor turned against neighbor. Loyalties were questioned. Accusations flew like musket fire. And then, one dark night, a group of vigilantes came to the house. Some say there were locals who suspected Annette's family of harboring British sympathies. Others claim they accused her of something far worse: witchcraft. In those paranoid days, such accusations were death sentences. They dragged the terrified girl upstairs to her bedroom, and there, from the rafters of her own home, they hanged her. 17 years old, innocent, murdered by people who were supposed to be her community. Other versions of the story claim it was British soldiers who killed her, believing her family were Patriot spies. But the result was always the same. Annette Williamson died violently, unjustly, in that house. Her body was buried in a shallow grave on the property. The murder was covered up by ashamed townsfolk who realized too late they'd killed an innocent girl. But if they thought that burial would end the matter, they were terribly wrong. For over 2 centuries, the ghost of a young woman in 18th century clothing has been seen in and around what is now the Country House Restaurant. She appears most often at an upstairs window, staring sadly toward the road, as if waiting for someone who never came. For her family, perhaps. For justice. For peace. Sometimes she's seen floating above the roof. Other times she drifts through the dining room before vanishing at second glance. Those who have encountered Annette's presence describe an overwhelming atmosphere of grief. Diners report glasses tipping or shattering on tables with no one touching them. Lights flicker and dim. Objects move on their own. Silverware rearranging itself. Chairs sliding back and forth from empty tables. Staff hear their names whispered in empty hallways. Footsteps patter across floors where no one walks. In the 1800s, a subsequent owner, a spiritualist, held seances in the house, attempting to contact the restless dead. What did Annette tell them? What does she want? Perhaps she seeks acknowledgement. Perhaps she wants people to know she was innocent, that she died for no reason other than fear and suspicion. Perhaps She simply wants someone to remember her name. Employees closing the restaurant at night occasionally glimpse her in mirrors, a pale young woman in a colonial gown standing behind them. They feel gentle touches on their shoulders when they're alone. They hear her crying in empty rooms. Unlike the vengeful spirits of horror stories, Annette seems more sorrowful than dangerous. But she is persistent. She will not be forgotten. She refuses to fade. Stony Brook's witch story serves as a sobering reminder. The real horror is not supernatural evil, but human cruelty. The true monster was not Annette Williamson, but the mob that murdered her, and perhaps that's why her spirit lingers. Not out of revenge, but as witness. A reminder that injustice leaves scars that time cannot heal. If you ever dine at the Country House restaurant in Stony Brook, treat the place with respect. If you see a young woman in antique clothing watching from the stairs, acknowledge her. Speak her name, Annette Williamson. She was 17. She was innocent. She deserves to be remembered. And perhaps, if enough people remember, if enough people speak her name with kindness rather than fear, perhaps one day Annette's tears will finally cease. Perhaps one day she'll stop waiting at the window. Perhaps one day she'll finally find peace. And so, dear viewers, we come to the end of our Halloween gathering. 4 tales from Long Island's forgotten shadows. 4 reminders that beneath the ordinary surface of suburban life, darker histories lurk. The werewolf of Boggy Swamp, whether beast or brilliant hoax that stalked Revolutionary War marshes. Chief Orovos, cursed to wander as a red owl until kindness freed him. The headless sailor of Lakeview Cemetery, still searching for peace he cannot find. And for Annette Williamson, the innocent girl whose unjust death echoes through centuries of sorrow. These stories are not famous. You won't find them in mainstream Halloween specials or ghost tour brochures. But they are part of Long Island's DNA, woven into the land itself. The fire before us burns low now. The October wind howls outside. And somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond your windows, these spirits continue their eternal routines, hunting, wandering, searching, and waiting. Long Island is not just a place of beaches and traffic. It is a place of memory, and some memories refuse to die. Thank you for joining me on this Halloween night. Lock your doors, check your windows, and remember, these stories happened here, perhaps closer to your home than you think. From all of us here at Frequency 51, have a happy Halloween and sleep well. Good night.